Halloween starts now. In honor of it being October, my favorite month of the year, and in honor of Halloween coming up, we are starting our celebration off early, and we are doing that by reading horror books for a week. Now, I love horror year-round. Horror is just one of my favorite genres in general. Like, I'm talking books, movies, I don't know what else, shows. I have just always had, and I don't want to say it's like a morbid curiosity, but I have just always had this attraction to the weird, to the spooky, to the frightening, which I guess that is morbid curiosity. So horror is just always something I've been interested in and always something that I've gravitated towards. And what a more perfect time of the year to finally read horror books for the entire week. Now, to just briefly dissect, explain horror a little bit, which I can do an entire video about this if you guys would like a little introduction to horror books if you want to get into horror, because like any genre of books, there are many subgenres. There's supernatural horror, what most people probably think of, your ghosts, your demons, your possessions, all that jazz. There's more psychological horror, which is one of my favorites. There's body horror. There's, in this one, splatterpunk, I guess is the correct term for this genre. Talk about that in a second. You also can have other little qualifiers, such as like, oh, it's gothic horror, or it's a little bit comedic, or A, B, and C. Get what I'm saying? There's all these little branches that trickle down. So if you do want to get into horror, if you want to dip your little toes in, first and foremost, stay away from splatterpunk. Stay away. Like I was saying, there's different types of horror. There are different levels of horror. It is not a one-size-fits-all. Splatterpunk is going to be at the very bottom, the deepest recesses and trenches of the human mind. That's where splatterpunk comes from. And I am someone who regards themselves as relatively unfazed. For the most part, I am unfazed by the things that I read, by the movies or shows that I watch. I'm not really someone who needs to check trigger warnings, which another thing to keep in mind if you do want to get into horror, pretty much every horror book that you read is going to have some type of trigger in it. So always check those. Like I was saying, I'm relatively unfazed by most things. I do think of myself as relatively unshakable. I stay away from splatterpunk. Think of the most heinous, devious things a person could do, turn it up like 20 degrees. That is the type of stuff that's going on in splatterpunk books. I read Womb by Duncan Ralston in one of my first videos because it was the lowest rated book on my Goodreads. So if you want to gauge of the types of things that are going on in there, you can watch my reaction to reading that book. My personal favorite subgenres of horror, I love a good psychological horror / thriller. I tend to lump thrillers and horror together in one genre, but they're really not the same thing. You can have thriller without like a ton of horror aspects to it. I just read both, so I lump them in together. A good psychological, I love a good twist. I love a good mind boggling. I love a good comedic horror book, like an author that can take a normally very horrific happening, a horrific situation, and then put a comedic spin on it and make it enjoyable to read. Love getting a good chuckle out of things. I don't love supernatural horror books, which is interesting because I love like supernatural horror movies like The Conjuring. Those are some of my favorite horror movies, but for some reason I just personally don't feel like it translates well into writing. Like they don't tend to keep my attention, which is a little bit ironic for this video because that is exactly the type of book that we are starting with. This is The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. I talked about this a little bit in my fall TBR video. Supernatural Gothic Victorian. The back says, when newly widowed Elsie is sent to see out her pregnancy at her late husband's crumbling country estate, what greets her is far from the life of luxury she expected when she married the young heir just weeks before. With her new servants resentful and the local villagers actively hostile, Elsie has only her husband's awkward cousin for company, or so she thinks. Inside her new home lies a locked door, beyond which is a painted wooden figure, a silent companion. I thought that sounded real spooky, so I thought this would be a good little vibe for October, for right around Halloween. dolls used to scare me when I was little. So some nights I had to hide my American Girl dolls in my closet because I wouldn't sleep with them in my room. So let's see if this one can give me a fright. All right, y'all, it is the next day. I have read about 80 pages of this so far. And to be so completely honest, I am bored. Not a lot is happening. Normally I would say, okay, 80 pages in, that's not that far in, but that's like a fourth of the book. This book is tiny. I like the vibes. The vibes definitely give October Halloweeny. I just watched the movie Crimson Peak the other night on Netflix. That is very much the vibe that I'm picturing as I'm reading this. Like gothic, Victorian, old, crumbling estate, spooky. Like, it's great. The vibes, the aesthetic, it's there. The writing is very atmospheric. Just as far as the story goes, I'm bored. Which this is like exactly what I said was going to happen at the beginning, because supernatural horror is not my favorite thing to read. We do have like two different timelines going on in this book. We have like the main timeline is in the past, and our main character is somehow in an insane asylum. So I am kind of interested to see how she gets there. So yeah, we get snippets of the present timeline of her in the insane asylum. We get the vibes that she's done something bad. And then the main timeline is just her moving into this old house. She's kind of snobby, the main character. She's a little bit snooty. I don't know, if your husband dies, I guess you get the right to be a little bit crabby. She did find a wooden doll that resembles her and her dead husband's child, or what their child would look like, because she's pregnant, the child's not born. So that's a little creepy. Guess we'll see what's going on with that. I'm gonna keep reading it. I'm probably just gonna try and power through it because, like I said, it's a very short book. And the other two books I'm planning on reading for this video, I'm actually very excited to read. So hopefully this gets better. I'm never gonna do that again. So I am officially halfway through this, and let me tell ya, it is dragging. I think it's just now picking up, but literally that entire first half, it has been genuinely so hard for me to get into this. I really think that everything up until this point has been sliding off of my brain, and I truly don't think I've ingested any of it. I've just been really bored. I don't feel like a lot is happening. I also think it has in part a little to do with the writing style. It is very reminiscent of something written centuries ago, which is quite literally the point, because it literally takes place in the 1800s. So the author did a really good job with that. It's just not personally my favorite type of writing style to read. Also, I cannot remember if I mentioned this in the first clip of me talking to you guys. I know I said that it's dual timeline, but it's actually triple. It is triple timeline. There are like diary entries from, I think, 200 years before the main timeline, and I'm finding that one to be the most interesting thus far. It is so much more interesting than what is happening in the main timeline and then like the present day timeline. That's where we're at right now. I have been struggling, but I am feeling, like I said, like things are about to pick up. Been bamboozled. I don't think a book has ever done this to me before. The ending does have me a bit gagged, I do have to say. The second half of this book felt like an entirely different book, but like the last 10 pages, I don't even know, maybe 5 pages, I did not see the plot twist coming. But then again, I've said it before, I'm not usually one to guess the plot twist. However, in this case, I feel like the author did such a good job at distracting you from the plot twist that was coming. Like with everything else that was going on, I wasn't even thinking this in my head. There were no thoughts in that direction. I just have never read a book where things flipped so completely. For the first half of the book, I was thinking we were seriously in like 2-star territory. This is easily like a 3.5, 3.75 because like I said, things popped off in the second half. The ending truly got me. They truly tricked me. But I still have to account for the struggle that was the entire first half. So we've had a very interesting start to this video. I really wanted to DNF this, but I pulled through and I was pleasantly surprised. The next book I'm gonna start is Starve Acre by Andrew Michael Hurley. Look at this creepy cover. Isn't that spooky? I don't remember how I initially came across this book. I might have seen it as a recommendation from TikTok and something to do with cults. The back says, the worst thing possible has happened. Richard and Juliet Willoughby's son, Ewan, has died suddenly at the age of 5. Starve Acre, their house by the moors. Oh, are we in Ireland? This is sounding Irish. Was to be full of life, but is now a haunted place. Juliet, convinced Ewan still lives there in some form, seeks the help of the Beacons, a seemingly benevolent group of occultists. Richard, to try and keep the boy out of his mind, has turned his attention to the field opposite the house, where he patiently digs the barren dirt in search of a legendary oak tree. So yeah, I saw the phrase group of occultists and I was like, sign me up. So I'm gonna start this and then we will be back once I've gathered some thoughts. So it is the next day. I have read about 100 pages of Starve Acre, but I am already so much more interested in this story than I was with the Silent Companions when I was the same amount of pages into it. Does that make any sense? Anyways, I was correct. We are in Ireland. Well, we might also be in Scotland. I actually don't know. Okay, so I could find nothing to confirm nor deny the fact that we were in Ireland. So I'm deciding we're in Ireland. It's very English, okay? We're somewhere over there. So we are in the assumed Irish countryside. This couple lives in like this huge house by the moors, hence my Ireland assumption. And we have learned that this couple has recently lost their child son. He is 5 years old, but he's dead. And this couple is dealing with their grief in 2 very different ways. Like the husband is throwing himself into his work. He is doing everything he can to not think about his son. He's trying to avoid thinking about his son. And the wife is doing the exact opposite. She is still holding on to the fact that maybe she thinks her son could still potentially be with them in some form. She's sleeping in his room. She doesn't leave the house. I mean, she's depressed. Understood. But right now, the wife is preparing to have this group of people come to her house. I think it's supposed to be like a medium or a reading type vibe. And the husband is really not on board with it. Like he is very skeptical. And the husband is quite skeptical. He is like not on board with these people coming to the house. So that's where we're at right now. I am enjoying this much more than I was the Silent Companions. Oh, also they are alluding to the fact that the son might have been a bit troubled. He might have had something a little funky going on with him. And we also still do not know how the son died. So yeah, all good things so far. I mean, not actually, but you know what I mean. My goal is to probably finish this today, this evening, because it's already a little bit later in the day. I think it only has, yeah, it's like 240 pages, not a super long book, and it is going quite fast for me. All right, we are back. I finished Starve Acre last night, and I think I'm gonna give this, I don't know, I'm between a 3.75 and a 4. So this is actually a novella, which I was unaware of. So that means that it was longer than a short story, but still shorter than a full-blown novel. I don't know why I just felt the need to explain that to you, because chances are you know very well what a novella is. But I guess I'm saying that because the fact that it is a novella is something I didn't like about it. Let me backtrack. I liked this, but as I was reading, I found myself thinking and wishing that I was getting more from it. I wanted it to be more fleshed out. I wanted there to be more of the story. And then I discovered that it is actually a novella, and that is the exact reason why I wasn't getting what I wanted from it. So I just feel like I would have liked it if it was either or instead of being in the middle as a novella. Like, I would have liked it if it was a more compact short story, or if it had been like way more fully fleshed out and way more detailed. Because when it comes to the story was actually so good. Like, this is more my type of horror. The type of unsettling that this book is the type of unsettling that unsettles me. Like, this is the type that sticks in my brain, and I'm gonna continue thinking about this book like for the next few days. Not to keep comparing this to The Silent Companions. I keep wanting to say The Silent Patient. The Silent Companions, not to keep comparing it, even though that's exactly what I'm about to do. But I would say like The Silent Companions is a very good example of a more traditional horror story, in my opinion. Like, classic ghost story. The horror aspects are more overt. The horror aspects are more in your face, more laid out for you. This is much more like A24 horror, which I talk about A24 way too much. But it's just, I could 100% see this being a movie put out by A24. It's weird. You're left not quite knowing exactly what happened because things are less in your face. Things are less spelled out for you, which I'm not saying when that happens it's bad. It's just two different types of stories. I know a lot of people tend to dislike when books leave you feeling like you don't actually know what happened. But for some reason, with horror specifically, I actually do tend to like that. I don't know. It's just something about horror that when it's over, I kind of like the fact that I have to think about it and put the pieces together myself after the fact. So yes, very weird, very sinister vibes, much more of a psychological horror. So if you like everything that I just talked about with this book, then I definitely recommend. And lastly, this book does not belong in this video, but I am reading it right now. So to finish out this week of reading horror books, lastly, I'm going to read The Whisper Man by Alex North. This is another one that's been on my TBR for quite a while now. I am thinking that this is more like truly a thriller, but something in me believes that there are going to be like heavy horror aspects. And I truly believe that, just based on nothing. A lot of times though, horror and thriller do overlap. I could be completely wrong, and this could be just a true thriller mystery, which I hope not, because that's not the point of this video. I'm going to start this, and we will see if I was right or if I'm just being delusional. Do you guys like my new glasses? In my humble opinion, I think I look quite adorable. This is spooky. I have read up to page 120, and there have been all of these like little moments where I'm like, ooh. I also literally never explained what this was about, so let's do that really quick. This is about a single father and his son. Single dad trope for all you romance girlies out there. But he's single because his wife died. And we don't really know a whole lot about that yet, but the father and his son moved to this new town, and this town has a little bit of history. 20 years ago, there was a serial killer called the Whisper Man, and he was called that because he would whisper into his victims' windows at night. Already spooky. So they moved to this town, and what happens? Another little boy goes missing. Who would have thought? So obviously that brings up all of these things that happened 20 years ago. The POV bounces around quite a bit. Obviously, the main one is this father's, but we also get the son's. We get the detectives working on the current case. One of the detectives being the one who worked on the case 20 years ago. So we get all the connections. What's really spooky though is this child, is this little kid. Let me tell you, as soon as my child comes to me and says that they're hearing things or they're talking to people who aren't there, it's over. I don't know who it's over for, either me or the kid. I don't know. Like, I am scared. I am a person who gets scared. How do parents deal with that? Like, the dad literally just asked him who he was talking to because he heard the child talking to a person that wasn't there. And he goes, The Boy in the Floor. What do you mean? I'm sorry? The Boy in the Floor? What do you mean by that? I would not be able to handle that personally. So yeah, I was right. There is a good element of actual like horror instead of it just being a thriller mystery about a serial killer. Like there is like a supernatural aspect going on here. And I'm just very interested to see how those two things tie together. It is a very rainy day today. I don't know if you can hear it. You're right by my window. And if I do say so myself, that's quite perfect reading weather. So my goal is to read a very good chunk of this today, and we'll see where we end up. Alright besties, I have officially finished The Whisper Man by Alex North, and therefore finishing all of the horror books that I was going to read for this week. I think I'm going to give this 3.75 stars because it was good. I liked it. I just feel like this is the type of book that, okay, I read it, I had a fine time while I was reading it, but moving forward in the future, I'm really not going to think a whole lot about this one. One of the plot twists really got me. You saw that. There were certain moments and certain things that this author did in this book that I actually really liked, and it definitely spooked me a little bit. Like there were some really creepy little moments that if I were to think about them in the middle of the night, I wouldn't feel so good about it. So that officially wraps up my week of reading horror books in order to celebrate Halloween. Honestly, now that I think about it, rarely give horror books 5 stars. Like to me, that's not really the point of them. Like I don't necessarily read horror books because they are peak examples of literature. It's the same thing with scary movies. Like I don't watch scary movies because they're good. You know? So I feel like an average rating of like a 3.5, 3.75 for a horror book is actually really good. So I would deem this video successful. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please bear with me. I know the posting has been a little bit inconsistent. I'm kind of figuring out a new schedule in life and trying to work everything out, but I'm still here. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere, and I am working my hardest to make this more consistent. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you decide to stick around, and I will see you in the next one.